Rebirth of a Movie Star. Author, J11, 22, 33. Chapter 21 to 25. Chapter 21. 1 week later, outside Jade and Gold had its opening ceremony. In the event, other than the tradition of bowing to the heavens and asking for luck, the secondary cause was to promote the movie to the media as well as to announce some details about the movie, such as its basic plot and introduction to the characters, as well as to give a small taste of the character design. So on that day, Bai Lang received the mail that Li Chuanqing's clothing in the movie. After all the important characters in the movie had changed into their clothing and lined up on site, Bai Lang understood what Zhu Quan was trying to do. If a movie couldn't use the actors' names to attract the audience, then there were still other methods to promote itself, such as a unique plotline, special effects, or interesting clips. And there were some movies where even if the audience didn't have a deep impression of the actors, they would remember the clothing, atmosphere, and set pieces from the movie. In that way, as long as the actors were adequate, then the movie can still be called a small success. Gold was the story of a princeling who had fallen on hard times. It also had the unusual plot line about a tailor. In terms of entertainment and freshness value, there was definitely enough. However, what it was still missing was a visual element to help draw the audience in. That's why Zhu Quan had chosen this kind of effect this time. Because of this, the ceremony was not held at the usual hotel but instead at a furniture store. Due to the limited funding, the furniture store was a good choice. In the warehouse there were many types of high-class furniture and looked like a period living room. There were high-end grand crystallish chandeliers, palace-style brocade curtains, embroidered high-back chairs, fringed pillows, and etc. It almost looked like a set piece from the movie. Combined with the actors' elaborate, even slightly flamboyant outfits, the visual effect immediately showed off the film's special characteristics. Even the female-led Shen, whose features could not be said to be a top beauty, with the added effect of the period clothing and the backdrop, looked very stunning. A cascade of historical curls cascaded down her back, and she wore dark moss green silk western jacket, a gray fur shawl, paired with a sets of pink pearls. As soon as she appeared, the cameras immediately started flashing. Bai Lang also changed quickly. He had arrived earlier to the venue. At this time, when Shen saw him, her face froze in an awkward position. He smiled gently and reached, like a true gentleman, held out his left elbow. This wasn't the prearranged move. It made Shen pause slightly. Her eyes could help but rove over the Bai Lang, who was wearing a deep-colored suit. His figure was tall and straight, and his smile was benevolent. Inside the opulent hall, under the soft light of the chandeliers, Bai Lang's lowered eyes were tender and elegant. Just like the character in the movie who was once high beyond all things. Even though he was now fallen, he still appeared like something from a fairy tale. This was the main character, Li Chuanqing. Shen heart couldn't help but speed up. It was almost like she was being drawn into that tender gaze. She reached out her hand and gently laid it on Bai Lang's offered elbow. At that time, pacha, the cameras flashed furiously. Many media picked this photo of Bai Lang and Shen tender and loving gaze. They used it to accompany outside Jade and Gold's introductory synopsis and wrote some favorable lines. However, it was a pity that this kind of news couldn't climb onto the entertainment world's headlines. The headline for today was a report of Emperor Feng, which had chosen the same day for its opening ceremony. Praise the Lord, Bai Lang has a new movie. I'm definitely going to watch. When someone becomes famous, they get better and better looking. This saying is definitely not wrong. Look how handsome Bai Lang's face is on the newspaper. Of course. I've been enamored with him since Jiang's Cheng. As I thought my eyes aren't wrong. Oh, don't you think Shen also got prettier? In her previous show I thought she was just ordinary. I didn't think that if she dressed like this and stood next to Bai Lang, it would actually look pretty decent. Everyone needs style and direction, but look at this backdrop. It's definitely going for an opulent and luxurious look. Anon, I'm pretty interested in this. Anyway, I'll definitely go to see it. As for the Emperor Feng that you guys are talking about, I actually think it looks a bit too serious. Although it's Zhu Quan, but isn't it about some kind of political intrigue? It's not really to my taste. Don't be ridiculous. Emperor Feng is a showcase of real skill. Other than the director Li Ziyun, in the movie Zhu Quan also acts all the way from young to old. His acting ability is super advanced. They don't need to sell any special opulent effects. It's real ability and real skill. Hey, are you trying to say that my Bai Lang is just a flower with no real skill? Think about those down jackets from uni in your closet. Who accompanied you to go buy them? Okay, big sister. I didn't mean it like that. What I meant is these two movies have different styles. One is more for entertainment value, the other one is more deep. I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to watch what I like. If you don't come with me to watch Bai Lang, then I also won't come with you to watch Emperor Feng. Don't get angry. I'm also interested in Bai Lang's movie. It's a small production, but who knows, it might have some unexpected surprises. Because Outside Gold and Jade and Emperor Feng had their opening ceremonies on the same day, it caused some of the e-news channels to decide to compare these two completely different movies together for no good reason. The reason for raising such a topic was to primarily stress that Emperor Feng was a large production, it was high anticipated and different from other ordinary movies. After all, in Emperor Feng, other than its director Li Ziyan and the film Emperor Su Quan, even the female lead was the newly crowned film Empress Fei Hong. The supporting male was the young A-list actor Yu Yang Ri. Other than its outstanding crew, it also had the support of many other popular actors. Its opening ceremony was so grand and filled with so many important people that if you left one out accidentally, you'd definitely be offending someone. The two movies actually a more strange connection. The villainous traitorous minister Guangxi in Emperor Feng was originally supposed to be played by the veteran actor Ke Kaiming. However, afterwards the actor was changed to Jian Yiling. Just as the audience was guessing the reason, Ke Kaiming's company announced that he was to take part in Outside Gold and Jade. This made the two movies intersect again. This news seemed to have the taste of gossip behind it. However, these comparisons actually allowed Outside Gold and Jade to jump on Emperor Feng's wind of fortune and rise up quite a lot. With the addition of Bai Lang and Shen Eru's beautiful period photographs, it seemed after Emperor Feng the audience also had a lot of anticipation for Gold. So it was an unexpected good surprise. Because of the limitations of funding, the filming schedule of Gold was very tight. After all, in the movie there were many opulent sets and furniture. These things were all rented and every day they cost money. The price was not low. So if Ju Quan could save money, then he wouldn't waste it. So since the first day of filming the set was filled with a tight atmosphere, Bai Lang saw this, and to him it wasn't unexpected. He didn't know when the news about the lack of funding would appear, but if things got to the point where Ju Quan and the producer Zhao Jingzhuan would have to announce to them that the filming had to be stopped, then it probably already couldn't be saved. So that's why he had to enter Ju Quan's friend circle and receive the news at the earliest opportunity. Thus Bai Lang had no choice but to use some methods. However, unlike his previous life, Bai Lang was no longer an unfortunate little star. Instead, he was the most famous person on set other than Ke Kaiming, and thus everyone treated him very respectfully. Thus, because of this, Ju Quan's attitude towards him also became more polite and distant. Based on Ju Quan's personality, it was likely that as time went on they would naturally become closer. However, Bai Lang didn't dare to delay the time. After thinking about it for a while, he finally decided to use Kang Jian's previous tactic and attack him using his stomach. In his previous life, Bai Lang's strongest impression of Ju Quan was his habit of eating a late-night supper. That's why Ju Quan had a big and round beer belly. Even 10 years earlier there was already clear signs. When Bai Lang saw it, he wasn't surprised at all. Thus Bai Lang began to prepare lunch boxes to take to set to eat. The excuse was due to his body. He couldn't get used to the food from outside, so he could only eat the food he prepared himself to avoid having a stomach ache. Even though this may be interpreted by some people as showing off, however, by bringing food himself, Bai Lang actually avoided bothering others. Also, he would always remember to bring extra portions for others. Thus it was hard for people to criticize him. However, in the beginning, other than the already familiar Hong Hong, no one would dare take food from him. However, after several more times, the first of who approached was not the fatty Ju Quan but instead Ke Kaiming. Today at lunch, Ke Kaiming came ambling over. He asked, "Mr. Bai, looking at this dish, it should be a local tea city dish, right?" Ke Kaiming was slightly over 60 this year. His looks were very respectable, and when he was younger he had been considered handsome. For his role in Gold he had dyed his hair white and his aura was very regal. His role was the villain who had kicked Li Chuanqing from heaven to earth, his fourth uncle Li Haiyun. In the movie his scenes with Bai Lang were not less than the first male supporting role. "Senior K, you're too polite. Just call me Lang, you're right. This is a dish from Tea City. If you don't mind, then do you want to try it?" Bai Lang smiled. Aye, then I'll be thick-skinned and impolite. "You can also call me Old Ke Kaiming said in a good mood. Actually, to be honest, I've been staring at your lunch boxes for several days. Really very envious." In his previous life, Bai Lang didn't have much contact with Ke Kaiming and wasn't familiar with him. Also, the rule in the entertainment circle was that if someone famous came to look for you, then it wasn't a problem. But if it was someone without fame, then it would be considered pandering to try and form a connection. Thus, Bai Lang's attitude towards Ke Kaiming before had been very responsible. Tn, as in he didn't act overly familiar in case he looked as though he was trying too hard to climb up. since QQM is more established than him. Now that K. Kaiming himself came to show interest, Bai Lang naturally went along with him. He hurried to open the extra portion he had prepared. The crispy fried food was placed inside a clean and round food box with green leaves accompanying. It looked very delicious. Bai Lang even asked Hong Hong to pour another cup of warm barley tea and hand it to K. Kaiming. I'm allergic to some preservatives, so I can only make some things myself. Okay, you must also be a foodie to recognize this coriander and squid straight away. K. Kaiming didn't reject him and happily took it. Thank you? You're very good at preparing things. I once shot a movie in T-City for some time. Back then we often had this dish on our table. I got quite sick of it. But now when I see it I feel quite nostalgic. Bai Lang smiled and replied, okay, you were filming Shout at the Beer, right? Back then I recognized the scene at one glance. As soon as the names of the actors were released, Bai Lang naturally found K. Kaiming's movies to watch. This was one of the things he had done to prepare. Thus K. Kaiming was quite surprised. That's a very old movie. You've seen it before. Bai Lang looked a bit embarrassed. Actually I went to find it after seeing the actors list. His meaning was, I didn't watch it because I was interested in it. K. Kaiming's eyes brightened. That's still pretty good. Right now there's not many young people who would do their homework so thoroughly. Keep up the good work and your career will be bright. Bai Lang thanked him sincerely. I don't dare. This junior has just entered the industry and will trouble senior for your help. K. Kaiming smiled and nodded. He picked up a piece of squid with his chopsticks and ate his lunch together with Bai Lang. The two people chatted together about their past filming experiences. Mostly K. Kaiming talked and Bai Lang listened and also asked a lot of questions. It was not until he put down his chopsticks and took a sip of barley tea that K. Kaiming cleared his throat and said, according to my observations, you're handling this role very well. Your movements and behavior is all very out of the ordinary. Your expression in front of the camera is also completely adequate. As an old person, I also don't dare to give out random tips. However, my opinion is you can still be a bit more thorough. Bai Lang never thought that K. Kaiming would give him tips. He put down his chopstick and said, be more thorough. Think about it. When we are acting, isn't the closest audience member the person right in front of your eyes? K. Kaiming laughed warmly. When you are speaking your lines, pay less attention to the camera and spend more time trying to convince the person that you're acting with. Perhaps there will be an unexpected good effect. The person that I'm acting with, Bai Lang paused. K. Kaiming smiled then added, on the day of the opening ceremony. Didn't you do very well? Bai Lang listened and immediately sank into his thoughts. From that day, Bai Lang followed K. Kaiming to learn the skill of influencing others, TN, i.e., to use your charisma to carry the person you're acting with into the role. Just like BL did with Shen Eru at the opening ceremony by making her fall a bit in love with him. This unexpected gain made Bai Lang delve into a new area of acting. By the time he recovered, the people that would crowd around him during lunch finally included, as Bai Lang wanted, the director Ju Quan. But by this time it had already entered the end of the lunar year. As planned, the crew finished filming the scenes at the villa before the end of the lunar year. After the holiday break, the set would be moved to the tailoring studio for the latter half of shooting. Thus any NG scenes taking place at the villa had to be reshot on the same day. It was quite a tightly packed schedule. However, this kind of schedule also ensured that the crew had a full 2 weeks annual leave. Thus more and more people began to discuss their holiday plans. Some wanted to return to their hometowns. Others planned to go overseas. Bai Lang of course avoided being asked this question. He would casually reply going home. However, as for the real answer, Bai Lang didn't know either. Especially because Qiu Qian also had to take Qiu Zhaohai home to Zindao to pass the new year. The day the two people left was New Year's Eve. The apartment became so quiet it was frightening. Bai Lang thus removed his watch and placed it into the drawer. Within the cluttered items inside the drawer, Bai Lang saw the old mobile phone he had stopped using. Unable to resist the voice inside his heart, Bai Lang charged it. Just as he expected, he found the text message sent from Bai Li from a few days ago. Are you done being angry? You should come home during New Year's, Ba. The corners of Bai Lang's lips jerked. He threw the old phone back into the drawer and then also turned off his new one. Then he forced himself to sleep for a long time and then ate hot pot on his own. He thought, I will eventually get used to it. It's only that his peace and quiet only lasted until the third day after New Year. On that evening, the door to the apartment was violently kicked open. Qiu Qian strode in with an ugly expression. What are you trying to do? How come you're not picking up the phone? Qiu Zhaohai was like a little artillery shell. He shot over and hugged Bai Lang's leg. Bai, don't ignore me. I miss you. Bai Lang couldn't help embracing Qiu Zhao with a lot more force than usual. Chapter 22. The watch returned to Bai Lang's wrist. It was just that Qiu Qian was very displeased about Bai Lang's disappearance. When his search for answers only yielded several vague statements, it made him even more dissatisfied. Thus he expressed that Bai Lang definitely needed a punishment, just like when Qiu Zhao ran away. So thus, with one more week of the holiday time left, Qiu Qian ordered Bai Lang to pack a suitcase and leave with them that afternoon. Bai Lang obeyed and packed a simple backpack. As he was leaving, he grabbed his phone and couldn't help asking, "Where are we going?" Qiu Qian coldly glanced at Bai Lang's phone. "Oh, so you still know how to use your phone? Too bad, because we are going somewhere where you won't be able to get any reception." Bai Lang was speechless. Was this holding a grudge? 5 days after New Year's, Sister Fang will probably contact me. What do you have an assistant for? If she can't find you, she will find her Hong. Qiu Qian lifted up a big bag that was Qiu Zhao luggage. "Let's go." Qiu Zhao was happily jumping up and down. He ran over to grab Bai Lang's hand. "Bai, let's go. This time we can go play together." Bai Lang glanced at Qiu Qian, who was walking in front, then whispered in a low voice, "Do you know where we are going?" Qiu Zhao grinned sunnily. "No idea." This child really made one worry. Without any further discussion, the car drove towards the back mountain and immediately took a turn towards the highway. There was an about 30 or 40 minutes car journey in which Qiu Zhao didn't stop talking, mostly about the boat he had taken when he went back to Zindao with Daddy and how big and how pretty it was. Bai Lang of course played the part of the conversation partner, making the appropriate responses. Outside the window he could only see more highway. This way, when he next realized what was happening, they were already at the entrance of a city's international airport. Bai Lang and Qiu Zhao were kicked out of the car. Bai Lang adjusted his sunglasses in a slightly shocked manner. "I didn't bring my passport." "I have it." Qiu Qian was just talking into the phone and responded to him between sentences. Not long later, Qiu Jin's assistant Xiaoli, who often helped transport Qiu Zhao, appeared out of nowhere. Qiu Qian threw the keys at him and after a few more sentences grabbed 2 big bags and at the same time put his arm around Bai Lang's waist and started walking towards the front door. "Let's go. What are standing around like an idiot for?" Bai Lang couldn't help but freeze. He quickly looked around them. 2 big men walking, one of whom had his arm around the other's waist. What was it if not coming out of the closet? Also, he was still holding Qiu Zhao hand. So Bai Lang dug his heels into the pavement, clearly a rejecting motion. "You?" Qiu Qian was also wearing sunglasses. But underneath his sunglasses his mouth twitched slightly. "I said before that you needed to be punished. Did you think I was joking?" Bai Lang didn't know what to say. He could only frown. What kind of punishment was this? Was it punishing him or was it punishing Sister Fang? Qiu Qian raised his eyebrow. "Last time didn't you say you didn't care? Now you do." Bai Lang stared at Qiu Qian for a moment. He couldn't figure out what Qiu Jin's motivation was. Thus he distanced himself, moved away from Qiu Jin's arm around his waist, and bent down and picked up Qiu Zhao, who was looking left and right in curiosity. "There's so many people here. Don't get lost," Bai Lang reminded Qiu Zhao as though nothing was wrong. Qiu Zhao completely didn't understand the situation. He excitedly nodded at Bai Lang and pointed at the things that caught his interest. "Bai, are we going to take a boat? I saw big crates like that when I went to take the boat with Daddy. They have it here too. Daddy said they were really heavy. There were also cars. Daddy said that the crates had to be put underneath the cars. We aren't taking a boat. We should be taking a plane." "Plane?" Qiu Zhao opened his eyes wide. "I know them. Planes are the big birds that fly in the sky." Qiu Qian saw that Bai Lang was holding Qiu Zhao and laughed lowly and strode forward. He didn't force his action from before. After all, if there were really paparazzi here, then didn't intimately holding someone else's son also require some explanation? Thus Qiu Qian strode with large steps into the main hall and took the 2 people to have their customs procedures completed. Because they took the special pathway for customs clearance and not the normal passengers one before directly boarding the plane, they didn't really get stopped for signatures. However, in the area where mobile phones with cameras were everywhere, there was no guarantee that they hadn't been photographed. The only thing that comforted Bai Lang was because they were taking a private plane, so even if he took off his sunglasses, he didn't have to worry about being photographed during the journey. After sleeping on the plane for a short while, after a few hours, Bai Lang found himself being blown by a sea breeze. Underneath his feet was white sand. He was in an island nation with a name he hadn't even heard of much before. When he looked in front of him, all he could see was an endless and vast blue sea. The sand was clean and pure, the sea was azure, and the breeze was warm and lazy. Bai Lang's holiday villa was on a private beach. After tanning in the sun for 2 days, even his bones felt soft. As for what Bai Lang had done these 2 days, the schedule was very simple. During the daytime he would play with Kyuzayo-hai in the water and sand, and then at night he would play with the older version again, the water and sand, but in a somewhat different manner. After having a simple island tour, Bai Lang gradually understood that this island was one of the Kyu family's shipping ports. Other than exporting oil and raw materials, the Kyu family had also invested in a tropical coffee beans business. It was the major player in this country's economic development, thus why their private planes could fly here whenever they wanted. This type of business seemed to have only arisen in the last couple of years. It was an inevitable trend that if you made a lot of money, then you would then seek out more avenues to make your money earn even more money. Even if the Anjiang Group, which essentially was just the Kyu family, wasn't a listed company, and was considered by outsiders to be a somewhat shadowy group, but based on the number of times it appeared on the major shareholders' list of other companies, it can be seen the reach of the group is slowly spreading. This type of investment methods in 10 years would allow the company to increase its value by a factor of 10. This was something that Bai Lang had heard. At that time, Kyu Chien was already in charge of the family for many years. That's why Bai Lang didn't at all believe that Kyu Chien was at this moment was just a relaxed boss of total entertainment. Since the Anjiang Group had so many faster ways of making money, for them to pick the entertainment business, there must be other public relations type motivation behind it. Thus, as for Kyu Jin's activities at the airport, after thinking about in the sun for a few days, he decided to just take it at face value. Just like when he had been photographed by the paparazzi, Bai Lang had already prepared for the situation where him being kept was exposed. Since he dared to it, then he also wasn't scared that it would be known. Of course, if he could avoid damage, then he didn't mind to avoid it. However, if someone as powerful as Kyu Chien wanted to expose it, how could someone like him prevent it? Therefore he wouldn't bother. However, just as Bai Lang said before, Sister Fang had only just painstakingly raised him into the limelight. If Kyu Chien suddenly did this kind of thing, when wasn't the person being punished Sister Fang? If Sister Fang knew the reason, that it was only because he had turned off his phone for a few days and didn't wear his watch, that everything she had done turned to dust, then shouldn't she vomit blood? Thinking about this, lazily lying down, Bai Lang decided to go drink a glass of cold juice to clear his throat as well as his thoughts. But when he turned his head, he found himself looking into the eyes of Kyu Chien, who was lying next to him and who had just ended his phone call. It should be mentioned that Kyu Jin's phone still had connection because he seemed to have made plans in advance. Kyu Chien hanged up his phone. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Bai Lang. "Should I help you add sunscreen?" Bai Lang looked at Kyuzayo-hai, who was playing far away. At this moment he was happily making a sand castle. "There's no need. Don't be polite." Kyu Chien came over and took the sunscreen oil from the side table and poured it into his hand. "The sun is too bright. If you get tanned, how will you film your movie? You need to always top up." Bai Lang silently drank some juice, then obediently lay back down. "Thanks." Kyu Chien smiled in a somewhat evil manner. He stepped over Bai Lang with one stride and then sat on the side of his chair. His warm and large hand filled with oil pressed down on Bai Lang's shoulders and the back of his neck. "Don't worry, I'll be careful and won't make you accidentally hard again." "Okay." What could Bai Lang say? He could only say again, "Thanks." The facts proved that this statement was a lie. Kyu Jin's hand, which alternated both hard and soft, slid over Bai Lang's sensitive underarm and waist, making him tremble. Kyu Chien evidently found this amusing. His slick hand kept dipping under the waistline of Bai Lang's swimming trunks. Just as Bai Lang was about to stop him, Kyu Chien suddenly said, "Tomorrow we'll be going back. Don't you have anything you want to say to me?" Both of his hands were become more and more bold. Bai Lang was at the mercy of his torture. After taking a few deep breaths to calm himself, Bai Lang finally opened his mouth. "That day at the airport, did anyone take a photograph of us?" Kyu Chien leaned low next to Bai Lang's ear. "There really were some. What do you think we ought to do? As long as you're happy." Bai Lang's voice wasn't steady because of where Kyu Jin's thumb had crossed over to some place that shouldn't be crossed. Luckily, from Kyuzayo-hai's perspective, Kyu Jin's hand would have been blocked by his back. "What do you think would make happy? To punish me and make me more obedient?" "Wrong." "Guess again. To give me more lessons to make more compliant?" "Wrong." "Guess again. To use more force so that Bai Lang had only finished half his sentence before his voice died. This was because Kyu Chien had suddenly bitten his ear. I just knew that you would rather die than say it. What if one day, while being silent, you change? What should I do then? Qiu Qian opened his mouth and then licked the place he had just bitten. I think that among the two of us, the possibility of you changing is higher. Bai Lang turned his head. Oh. Then why don't you ask me about Su Quan? Why don't you ask about the things that Yachi told you? Or is that you don't think it's necessary to ask? When Qiu Qian said the last thing, his eyes became somewhat dangerous. All you need to do is turn off the phone. Suddenly the joking questions became serious. It made Bai Lang flounder. Underneath Qiu Jin's penetrating gaze, Bai Lang couldn't help lowering his eyes. The reason I turned off my phone is because I didn't want to get any calls from my family. Qiu Qian laughed coldly. Do I need to tell you that before the new year, Bai Li once called the company to ask if your phone number had changed? Bai Lang froze. Before he could answer, Qiu Qian grasped his lower jaw. He said lowly, so be honest with me. The person who you didn't want to get a call from was me, right? The one you wanted to get away from for a while was me, right? Why? Bai Lang was trapped in a place he couldn't escape. However, if he wanted to, he could still just seal his lips and not give Qiu Qian any answer. Qiu Qian knew this. Underneath the surface of warmth and gentleness, there was an unyielding stubbornness. This was the same as the Bai Lang of the past. Perhaps he didn't have the intimidating aura, but when it came to something he felt strongly about, Bai Lang could be incredibly firm and immovable. This was the special quality that Qiu Qian had felt when he had met Bai Lang for the first time at the club. Then afterwards Qiu Qian had taken over Bai Lang's entertainment contract. It was out of amusement because he wanted to play with this young man like a plaything. However, a few months ago when Bai Lang had suddenly requested to see him, it was as though his entire person had changed. He had become tolerant and amenable, and he had learned to change and endure. But then in the time that they had gotten to know each other, Qiu Qian once again felt that Bai Lang was still the same as before. He still had a bottom line that he would never cross. He had asked for 5 million. But after that he never once asked for more money. Even after saving Xiaohai, which can be considered making Qiu Qian owe him greatly, he was so stupid that he never considered to ask for something more as recompense. So even though Bai Lang put on a great act in front of him, but after testing him time and time again, Qiu Qian gradually felt like being suspicious of this person really made him self-tired. He only wanted to put his effort into something that concerned him more, which was how to make Bai Lang stay with him. Just like the first time they had met when his heart had moved slightly. Now that feeling became stronger and stronger. If Bai Lang wanted to run, then Qiu Qian would make it so that he didn't have anywhere to go. Even if Bai Lang had some kind of other ulterior motive for being with him, then if Qiu Qian could satisfy it he would. And if he couldn't, then he would just continue to cling on to him in a love-hate relationship. So what did he have to be scared of? Well, actually what he was scared of was if the stubborn creature Bai Lang steadfastly refused to admit things and continued to stay stubbornly inside his own walls. Because Qiu Qian could feel that Bai Lang also had some feelings towards him. After all, Bai Lang had previously raised the topic of loyalty. He had said that if he found someone new then he should first throw away the old person, and after the end-of-year party, Bai Lang had also wanted to avoid him. If there were truly no feelings at all, and it was just a contractual exchange, then Bai Lang wouldn't have this kind of reaction. So Qiu Qian kissed the tightly closed lips. He sighed and said, even if you like this kind of jealous and awkward feeling, I don't. What is it that can't be said between us? I like you, so I want to chase you to become my lover. If you agree, then just say so. Then isn't everything resolved? This type of confession really made Bai Lang speechless. Chapter 23. Qiu Qian suddenly slapped Bai Lang's butt. Turn around. I finished with the back. Bai Lang was still frozen. Very slowly he obediently rolled over. After a few seconds of thinking he finally opened his mouth. Regarding the phone, really the reason was because... However, he didn't get to finish before Qiu Qian pinched his waist forcefully. Wrong answer. Qiu Qian narrowed his eyes. Right now there's only 2 answer options. Number 1. Okay, let's try it. Number 2. You're disgusting. Leave your money and get out. Of these 2, which one do you want to pick? Bai Lang was silent. This kind of method was abrupt and blunt. But at the same it didn't leave any room for vagueness. Qiu Qian came closer to Bai Lang. He licked Bai Lang's lips in a dangerous manner. I should remind you that you only have 1 chance. If you chose wrong, then there won't be a second chance. Bai Lang looked into Qiu Jin's eyes and heard his warning. He wanted to laugh helplessly. If you ask me to choose like this, then how can I give any other answer? Bai Lang admitted to himself that it was just Qiu Qian had guessed. that his heart had been somewhat moved by their time together. Probably because the days after his rebirth were too lonely. Suddenly returning to 10 years ago, although the people around him seemed familiar, however they were also like strangers. The things that had happened within the Bai family also hurt Bai Lang's heart a lot. So after getting together with Qiu Qian, Bai Lang would naturally place his feelings onto him. No matter if it was friendship, feelings of gratefulness, or if were some other type of nameless emotion. Then with the addition of Qiu Ziohai's warmth and intimacy, the kind of warmth that made one's heart soften, Bai Lang couldn't help but think that if his days could just go on like this, then it would be pretty good. That was why, when Qiu Qian took Qiu Ziohai home for New Year's, the cold and empty apartment forced Bai Lang face the cold, harsh reality once again. A warm and peaceful life. It was all just an illusion. Like an oasis in the desert, it was just a beautiful mirage. Because also Bai Lang knew that Yaqi's words were not just spoken out of anger and an unwillingness to accept his situation. There was some truth to it too. Take the Qiu Qian of his past life for an example. In his life there had been many rumored partners, all of them small stars from the time before they got famous. The time to cycle from one to the next was not fast, but neither was it slow. The pattern was one every 1-2 years. As for these stars who had become famous because of Qiu Qian, their fans might not know a thing, but the people inside the industry were very clear. As for why Qiu Qian was like this and if the reason was really Su Quan as Yaqi said, then Bai Lang wasn't sure. However, that actually wasn't important. The important thing was after 1-2 years then their relationship should also follow the same trajectory and finish. Just history repeating itself. So Qiu Jin's guess was actually very accurate. The moment that Bai Lang had switched off his phone, he really had made a decision in his heart. He had made the decision that he would use these days of being alone to rebuild the walls around his heart. Since he was only with Qiu Qian for the purposes of gratitude, then when the time was up Bai Lang didn't want to have forgotten how to be on his own. It was just that, he never thought that Qiu Qian would suddenly give him a choice like this. It was just like placing a small glass of water in front of someone who had already been drinking for a long time. As for how long he could continue drinking, well, no one knew. But at least the cup of water was real and not fake. After all, since Qiu Qian had been his patron and they had slept together for some time, then there was no need for him to lie to him, was there? So if Qiu Qian was serious, there was some sliver of emotion, some measure of genuine feelings, something that could respond to the nameless emotions that was in Bai Lang's own heart. Bai Lang really found it difficult to control his urge to nod his head. But what if all of this ended up still being an illusion in the end? Well then, at least it would be better than having nothing right away. Bai Lang closed his eyes. There was a lot of conflict in his heart and he sighed. Okay, let's try it. Qiu Jin's gaze deepened. Then his entire body pressed down on Bai Lang's and he captured Bai Lang's lips and began kissing him hotly and passionately. Bai Lang closed his eyes and cooperated fully. After brief pause his hands also clutched Qiu Jin's shoulders. He was rewarded from Qiu Jin's satisfied groan. His entire body pressed down on Bai Lang's and one of his legs maneuvered between Bai Lang's own long legs. Just at this opportune time, an unhappy voice appeared. Daddy, why are you squashing Abai? Abai will get broken. Qiu Ziohai threw a ball of sand and unhappily stamped his feet. Bai Lang really didn't want to know exactly what Qiu Ziohai had seen. He only got up and then, with a red face, took Qiu Ziohai to play in the water. After playing at the beach, usually it would be time for Qiu Ziohai to have a bath with either Bai Lang or Qiu Qian. Then they would have a private seafood buffet in the comfort of their own villa. Qiu Qian originally hoped that today Bai Lang might agree for them to take a bath together with Qiu Ziohai and nurture the three people's feelings together. But before he could even take a step into the bathroom, the ringing phone made him stop. You're coming back to China tomorrow, right? Fang Hu's voice said directly from the phone. Tomorrow night. Did you take care of everything? Qiu Qian gazed mournfully at the bathroom door which closed in front of his eyes. Everything's taken care of. Fang Hua then immediately began to complain. But consider it as my begging you time if you want to do something like this. Can you inform me first? If you can't be bothered making the proper arrangements, then I'll do it for you. It's the New Year's. What were you thinking going to the airport and putting a display with Bai Lang? Right now everyone has mobile phones. Do you really think you're that lucky? Qiu Qian laughed lightly. So what if they have mobile phones? I'm scared that they won't take photos. So then why did you tell me to take care of the media then? Fang Hu's voice rose quite a lot. Just some small precautions. Qiu Qian was in a good mood so he didn't mind explaining. I don't want have to cover up forever when I'm conducting a romance. So from now on, I want them to slowly get used to my good relationship with Bai Lang. This way, if things develop in the future, then the impact on Bai Lang will be less. On the other end, Fang Hua was silent for some time. Then she asked in a somewhat halting voice, "What did you say? Romance with who?" "Who else except Bai Lang?" Qiu Qian announced happily. "Don't worry, I won't ruin your protégé." Fang Hua was definitely not as relaxed as Qiu Qian. She was silent again, then said, "Are you being serious?" Qiu Qian laughed in reply. "Why would you ask that? I thought once the time was up then." Fang Hua stopped. "Don't you already? Turns out all of you think you know me better than myself." Qiu Qian made his voice very casual. Fang Hua sighed. "Okay. I know what to do. As long as you're clear on what you're doing." From within the bathroom emerged the sound of Qiu Ziohai's laughter and the splashing of water. It was slightly dulled by the closed door. The sound of a warm and peaceful family filled the space. The corners of Qiu Jin's lips raised up. "I'm extremely clear." Just a few days of holiday was definitely not enough. When Qiu Ziohai heard that it was time to go home, he clutched onto the branches and leaves and refused to leave. Bai Lang could only use pancake with spring onion to persuade him. After all, in the holiday villa, Bai Lang couldn't cook. Qiu Ziohai's eyes lit up. Every moment he spent not asleep on the plane journey was used in making up the menu. However, the big chef Bai Lang slept the entire way. After all, the night before he had had a night of strenuous adult activity. It was even more passionate than any other night before. After all, lovemaking couldn't be separated from the world love. Since their relationship had entered a new stage, all of their touches and kisses seemed to have an additional layer of electricity and heat. Bai Lang was tossed by Qiu Qian until he cried and begged for mercy, and the next day his eye bags got heavier. Even after getting off the plane, he didn't feel fully recovered. Luckily, when they got back to the country, because of certain arrangements, it wasn't under the eyes of a large audience as when they left. The photographs of the three of them taken the day they had left the country had been suppressed by Fang Hua before they could be published. Then, under Qiu Jin's instructions, she had also posted the news that Bai Lang had gone on holidays with a friend's family. To those on the inside, they only needed to take one look at e-news and know immediately what kind of holiday this was. After all, Qiu Qian had previous history. However, this time it seemed Qiu Qian was actively controlling the news. Under normal circumstances, no one would dare to write this kind of thing that everyone knew, but no one had real evidence. After all, no one wanted to make an enemy of the young master Qiu. Thus, a few photographs were posted in the corners of a confusing spread of other news, and didn't cause much of a fuss. TN. So QQ and FH are controlling the news. They want to slowly let people know about the relationship but not cause any large drama. Hence releasing in dribs and drabs, if that makes sense. However, in the eyes of the industry insiders and people in the know, this was a clear sign of who was behind Bai Lang and whether or not they could touch him. This was the effect that Qiu Qian had planned. Right now he had placed onto Bai Lang a label of belonging to him. Thus, when the Wrong family had celebrated his 70th birthday 2 weeks later and the honored guest Qiu Qian brought Bai Lang along with him, it didn't cause too much of a furor. The current head of the Wrong family, Wrong AI's 70th birthday was held at the Wrong family mansion. The list of guests included people famous in the political and business circles. There was a large network of contacts that the Wrong family wanted to keep secret. Thus the banquet was mostly private and kept hidden from the eyes of the journalists. Even if some news got out, all of the journalists knew that this was one topic they couldn't write about. Qiu Qian had received his invitation long before leaving the country with Bai Lang. After coming back to China, Qiu Qian raised the topic to Bai Lang of going together. Bai Lang agreed immediately. One of the reasons was because of his friendship with Wrong Seki. So even if he didn't get an invitation and attended with Qiu Qian, it would still not be untoward to go to make his greetings. However, he didn't expect that when he got to the party, Qiu Qian would smile and say he wasn't even sure if Bai Lang would be even to get see Wrong Seki. This was because the list of people who were attending were similar to Qiu Qian. There were mostly the important business associates of the Wrong family. There would also be a separate party for private friends. The two parties weren't mixed. When Bai Lang realized this, he said, "Then why am I here?" Qiu Qian raised his eyebrow. "Because this party is boring, ma, so you come and accompany me to keep me entertained." Bai Lang looked at Qiu Jin's casual expression and thought that if this guy didn't even think it was impolite to bring a male companion, then there wasn't any need for Bai Lang to think too much. However, soon after Bai Lang stepped into the opulently decorated venue in the latest black suit that Li Fu had made for him, he quickly understood Qiu Jin's nonchalant attitude. Because inside Bai Lang saw many such companions. There was the new film Empress Fei Hong, the goddess of TV hosting a Zhang Meiyi, the long-legged supermodel Li Lin Lin, as well as the newly hot young male idol Lee Kuan Lin. All of them came with someone who was obviously an honored guest. And some of these honored guests were people that clearly were already married. Bai Lang absorbed everything in front of his eyes. Then he couldn't help aiming a glare at Qiu Qian. Qiu Qian immediately pressed close to Bai Lang's ear. He whispered in a low voice, "Some of them also brought their wives. Just look at the ugly ones." Bai Lang decided not to ask which category he belonged to. He continued to observe the venue before he suddenly paused. Because Bai Lang had seen Su Quan. That perfect and exquisite face bore a warm and gentle smile. He was following beside an old man sitting in a wheelchair. Bai Lang also recognized this old man. Every time there was news about major political negotiations, his name would never fail to be mentioned. Hong Yu. Chapter 24. Qiu Qian, who was standing by Bai Lang, also seemed to notice the direction of his gaze. Qiu Qian followed it, and at the same time Su Quan also looked over at the two of them. Immediately Su Quan smiled in a familiar manner. After smiling at Qiu Qian, his gaze swept over Bai Lang, and as if by coincidence the smile faded quite naturally, as though the greeting had been completed. There was nothing particularly unusual, but at the same time Bai Lang felt a coldness sweep through him. However, this was also normal. Bai Lang had no relationship with Su Quan, so he also looked away and continued observing his surroundings. It was just as Qiu Qian had told him. Rong Siki didn't seem to be here. Qiu Qian pressed closer to him and said with a teasing smile, "What are you looking around at? Su Quan just greeted us before." Today Qiu Qian was dressed formally for once. He was wearing a traditional three-piece suit. The color was predominantly a dark gray paired with a black shirt and a dark purple tie. Perhaps because he wasn't used to it, currently this tie had already been made askew by Qiu Qian. "Only you, not us." Bai Lang looked around. After confirming they were in a quiet corner, he reached out and helped Qiu Qian to straighten his tie and at the same time flatten his collar. Qiu Qian cooperated by raising his chin. He gazed at Bai Lang in a pleased manner. "If you want to know about Su Quan, just ask and I'll answer. However, if you don't ask, then I'll assume that you don't want to know." Bai Lang followed on by helping smooth the shoulders of Qiu Jin's suit. This movement was something he had carefully learned at the regal suit. "I still trust you." "Still." Qiu Qian grasped Bai Lang's hand. "That means things might change." Bai Lang said vaguely, "Trust is something that's very simple. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, then it's not." Bai Lang was clearly deliberately distancing himself using this manner of speaking. Just like before, when no matter how much he investigated, Qiu Qian did not feel as though he was able to see through Bai Lang. He was like a mirage. At the same time close and far away. That's why Qiu Qian felt that he needed to break the barrier between them as quickly as possible. Otherwise there wouldn't be any chance for a future. Qiu Qian tightened his grasp on the hand inside his palms. Right now he was trying his best to hold on to it. "Very good. Then let's go make our greetings to the host." Bai Lang nodded his head. Qiu Qian didn't let go of his hand but continued to hold it as they walked to the other side of the room. The first couple of steps Bai Lang hesitated and walked slowly, but then he began to follow with big strides. After all, wasn't this a kind of clear, public relationship that he died trying to achieve in his past life? In this life he didn't need to do anything, and instead it was almost forced upon him. Thinking about it this way really made Bai Lang laugh helplessly. The format of the dinner tonight was that of a buffet. The guests went to get their own food and drinks, and a dining area was set up nearby with free seating. The advantage of such a format was that guests could freely move around and mingle without the restrictions of formal seating. However, if one was not able to find anyone they wanted to talk to or whom wanted to talk to them, then they could only sit by themselves in a lonely and bored manner. That's why the invitation clearly stated that guests could bring a companion. Bai Lang had seen several artists in the crowd and thus knew there was nothing untoward about his attending. However, as to what nature of companion was brought by each person, that was up to them to decide. The birthday host was the senior Rong Ai. He was accompanied by several middle-aged members of the Rong family to receive each guest's congratulations. Just before, Rong Ai had already gone to the stage to make a simple thank you and formally open the party. Afterwards, there also weren't any other speeches arranged because there were so many important people at the party that it wasn't appropriate to choose who to put on the stage and who to leave out. Thus only the birthday host made a speech. And as the elder of the country's #1 aviation business, he definitely had this right. Rong Ai was wearing a gold tank coat tonight. His figure was thin and short, however he still looked very spirited. When Bai Lang and Qiu Qian went over, Rong Ai had just finished talking to the Hong Yu, who was sitting in a wheelchair. To make the head of the Rong family come over to speak to him personally, It was clear that this person's identity was exalted even among this group of honored guests. Wrong Eye wore a joyful smile the entire night. When he saw Qiuqian, he stretched out his hand. "Oh, isn't this Xiao Qiu? Welcome, welcome." When such a young person is willing to come to an old man's birthday party, it really makes me feel young again. The Qiu family controlled the sea shipping business and the Wrong family controlled the air shipping business. From a long time ago they had many business deals. These couple of years as Qiuqian had started to represent the Qiu family in their shipping business, so he naturally had a lot of contact with the younger generation of the Wrong family. Qiuqian smiled and returned the handshake warmly. "Congratulations to Elder Wrong. May your life be long and prosperous. Thank you for words and also for the pots of kumquats. They look very fresh and full of fortune. I love them so much I can't put them down." Wrong Eye grinned happily. He was able to accurately recall the gift that Qiuqian had sent in advance. This showed that his ability to deal with outsiders and attention to detail was very good. "If Elder Wrong likes it, that's good." Qiuqian smiled. "Don't just look. Eat them. They're good for the body. As for the method of eating, perhaps Bai Lang you can give Elder Wrong some suggestions." This naturally gave Bai Lang an opening to speak. "Elder Wrong, happy birthday. Other than eating, you can also wash them, and with the skin together you can brew a tea. It's good for digestion and relieving phlegm." Bai Lang didn't need to pause long to think about it. After all, this gift was chosen by him. However, 1 hour before and 1 hour after, you shouldn't eat any dairy-type products. A flash of surprise showed in Wrong Ai's eyes. After all, many people like to bring stars to these kind of occasions. It was just like women bringing a designer handbag to show off. Wrong Eye was already used to it. However, since most of these partners were only temporary, they usually would not be given the opportunity to converse with anyone important. When Qiuqian had come, he had often brought some small stars with him and had followed this rule. But now, so it's like that. Some thoughts turned inside Wrong Ai's head and he smiled at Bai Lang. "It's good that you've come, Mr. Bai. I've heard that previously you took care of our Siki a lot and I haven't had a chance to thank you." After speaking, he reached out and clasped Bai Lang's hand, clearly also treating Bai Lang as a proper guest. Bai Lang clasped his hand back. "There's no need. It's only just my job." "Very good. It's okay for young people to do what they like. However, no matter what you choose, you should always do your best." Wrong Eye nodded and smiled. He looked around and said, "Oldest son, Siki didn't come today." To him, a serious-looking middle-aged man came forward. "No. He has lessons tonight. It's okay to take a break once in a while. Tell him to come and accompany Mr. Bai to chat." Wrong Eye instructed. "There's not that many young people at the venue. It wouldn't do for Mr. Bai to get bored." After he expressed this intention, a woman a few steps away dressed in a professional-looking cream suit smiled and said, "Grandfather, you probably don't know, but actually Mr. Bai knows our Xiaozan Tulai. He came to visit with desserts." Afterwards, Xiaozan might not say much, but I can tell it left a strong impression on him. Wrong Eye was genuinely shocked this time. "Aio, to leave a strong impression on Xiaozan. That's really extraordinary." When the topic turned to the kids, Bai Lang immediately felt much more relaxed. "We happen to be neighbors. Xiao Hai is always making a fuss about wanting to play with Xiaozan, so I had no choice but to disturb him." Wrong Eye felt a bit lost. "Xiao Hai?" Qiuqian smiled and interjected, "My son. Qiu Zio Hai. He's in the same class as your family's Wrong Zan. Such a coincidence? How come no one told me?" Wrong Eye was both surprised and joyful. "This is really fate time. We should all have a meal together and get more familiar. Haha. If Mr. Bai can really make that grandson of mine who always has an expressionless face show some feelings, then it's something I have to see." Since the conversation had turned to family matters and the atmosphere became a lot more intimate. All the way until an elegant voice interrupted them. "What are you all talking about so happily?" "Eighth brother." It was a slightly plump but cultured-looking middle-aged man. On his arm was the elegantly dressed film Empress Fei Hong. They both smiled as they came over. Bai Lang recognized him. He was one of Qiu Jin's rivals in the younger generation of the Qiu family, the third son Qiu Kuno. A few years later he would be ruthlessly trampled by Qiu Qian. The event had even reached the news. Qiu Kuo said in a genteel way, "On an occasion like this it's not good to take up too much of the host's time. Since I'm your older brother, it's my job to give you a little reminder. Otherwise outsiders might think our Qiu family isn't raised well." The smile didn't leave Qiu Jin's face, but his eyes became significantly colder. Qiu Kuo's manner of speaking made it clear that he was telling everyone that Qiu Qian wasn't raised well. If one wanted to talk about Qiu Jin's father Qi Rangsen, Other than the fact that he was a shipping and gambling mogul, then his most notable achievement to date would be his openly and publicly taking of 4 wives. And Qiu Qian wasn't even the child of any of these 4 wives but just a wild weed from the outside. He wasn't properly brought back into the house until he got older. The stories about this big family's messy private lives were also famous throughout the country. Thus Qiu Qian also didn't hide but only said lightly, he can remember to have, but can't remember to raise. That old man also must be very busy. In a few words he placed the hat of exposing family ugliness to outsiders on top of Qiu Kuo's head. Qiu Kuo's face froze. He could only clear his throat and turn around to pay his respects to Rong Ai. Sorry to make Elder Rong laugh. I am a junior of the Qiu family, the 3rd son Qiu Kuo. This time I represent my father to pay respects to Elder Rong on his birthday. I wish Elder Rong fortune as wide as the East Sea and longevity as long as the North Mountain. This junior has accompanied my father to study and learn for a long time. I often hear father talk about Elder Rong's achievements and have admired you for a long time. This time I also hope that I can learn things from Elder Rong and will be grateful for your guidance. Rong Ai continued to smile. He also shook Qiu Kuo's hand in the same manner. So you are another scion of the Qiu family. Welcome, welcome. Qiu Kuo held his hand and also bowed his body 75 degrees. The movement was very humble and respectful. However, when Rong Ai hadn't even had a chance to withdraw his hand, another jade hand stretched out. It was Fei Hong who was smiling beatifically. This junior is Fei Hong. I also want to wish the elder a happy birthday and a long life as bright as the sun and moon. Although her words were very nice and according to Western traditions, shaking hands with a woman was not rude. However, the people here were old and traditional. In the eyes of the people around, Fei Hong's movement clearly showed she didn't know her place. For a moment Rong Ai didn't say anything nor did he reach out his hand. The oldest son Rong he stepped forward. From one side he stretched out his hand. Welcome. Miss Fei's name is very famous. Since she was complimented in this manner, joy flashed through Fei Hong's face. She quickly forgot the moment of awkwardness. The 2 handshakes were completed and the awkwardness from Rong Ai's rejection was melted. However, when Rong Ai saw that Qiu Kuo didn't look at all understanding and instead looked somewhat gloating, his smile faded slightly. At the same time Qiu Qian made his farewell. It was clear he didn't want to spend much time with this brother of his. Rong Ai made a few polite remarks about having a good time, then watched Qiu Qian walk away still holding Bai Lang's hand. This pair of backs was straight and graceful, neither too humble nor too proud, and their behavior have been natural and easy. Rong Ai wanted to sigh. Even though 2 men together was clearly not traditional, however, when compared to the male and female pair in front of him right now, somehow they made him feel much more comfortable. Not long after, Rong Siki came in wearing a suit and raised some small commotion from the guests inside. Until now, few people on the outside knew the relationship between Rong Siki and the Rong family. In formal business banquets, even if other members of the Rong family came, Rong Siki would never appear. This time he did, and under the eyes of half the people in the room, they saw that after going to speak to Rong He for a few moments, he immediately made a beeline for Bai Lang. Brother Lang, hello? Rong Siki said immediately. I'm sorry for coming late. Bai Lang was holding a plate of fruit. He smiled. I'm the one that should be sorry. I didn't think that I would make you have to come all the way. Have you eaten? Rong Siki very honestly shook his head. Not yet. Right now it was already 7 or 8 o'clock. Bai Lang asked curiously. They said you were having lessons. What kind of lessons? A frustrated expression appeared on Rong Siki's face. English class. Is it hard? Rong Siki nodded his head morosely. Bai Lang wanted to laugh. He was just about to share some study techniques he had when his mouth was stuffed by a very large black cherry. Qiu Qian appeared by his side. His plate was filled to the brim with meat. He raised his eyebrow. Talk after eating. What's the hurry for? Bai Lang felt helpless. It was very difficult to talk with a cherry in his mouth. He could only point to a seat, indicating to Rong Siki that they should sit there. After Bai Lang had walked a few steps away, Qiu Qian looked at Rong Siki and said in a somewhat warning manner, talk is okay. But Bai Lang already has a boyfriend. He was still a bit unhappy about the end-of-year party when Bai Lang had spent the whole night talking to Rong Siki. Although clearly there weren't any fireworks between these 2 people. However, unexpectedly Rong Siki met his eyes in a completely unafraid manner. He suddenly said, Sister Fang said that Brother Lang owes you money. How much money? Qiu Jin's eyebrow climbed higher. Why do you want to know? I'll pay it back for him. You'll pay it back for him? Qiu Qian narrowed his eyes. Was he wrong about this kid? Then what? Wrong. Siki went silent for a while. Then he said, then Brother Lang can pay me back slowly. Qiu Qian couldn't help bursting into laughter. He somewhat understood why Bai Lang liked talking to this kid. Okay, little brother, go and get your food. Eat more so you can grow up quicker. Wrong. Siki didn't understand. He frowned. You haven't replied to me. Qiu Qian said mirthfully, right now he doesn't owe me money. He owes me something else. He took his plate and left. Not a single event that had just transpired was missed by Su Quan, was standing on the other side of the room, watching. Chapter 25. The good thing about having a self-service bar was the freedom. At the same time, the environment of eating was also very free. Prior to sitting down, Qiu Qian had already taken Bai Lang around to greet people. Still, after they sat down, they were still subject to countless people coming over for a chat. Bai Lang thus understood why when Qiu Qian had dinner events, he often came home and still wanted to eat the noodles that Bai Lang cooked. Bai Lang didn't intend to eat too much. He had just came back from overseas, and if he ate any more then he would look too round on the cameras. So he only took some vegetables and fruit and didn't mind the interruptions. However, Qiu Jin's appetite was big. He had only managed to eat half of his plate full of meat, but it was already cold. Thus Bai Lang got up and went to get Qiu Qian his self-made hamburger. That was, he would take 2 pieces of bread, some vegetables, a few tomato pieces and some roast beef, and stuff them together to make a hamburger. When he saw Qiu Qian had a spare moment, he gave it to him. Qiu Qian seemed to enjoy this very much. He could eat 1 in 3 bites and seemed to want more. Wrong. Siki was sitting in a corner. His position was blocked by Bai Lang, and so he didn't get disturbed much. When he saw Qiu Jin's satisfied expression, his gaze glimmered, and so Bai Lang also made him one. He was also very satisfied with the taste. After eating and drinking his fill, Wrong. Siki was led away by the elders in his family, and it was unknown who he had gone to meet. Qiu Qian also took Bai Lang on another round of the room, and then it was approximately time to leave. The waiter came by to top up the champagne, and Qiu Qian looked around. There's one last person to talk to. After we speak to him we can leave. Bai Lang nodded and agreed. After a whole night he already felt his back was sore. Qiu Qian looked at him sideways. Tired? Bai Lang gently rolled his shoulder. Having to stand up so straight like this the whole night? I don't even need to do it when I'm acting. It's better once you get used to it. Qiu Qian smiled and raised his glass. But I have to say very honestly that you look very handsome tonight. Bai Lang was wearing the suit that Li Fu had specially made for him. The shoulders were very stiff and the waist was cinched in perfectly. When paired with the tapered pants, it made Bai Lang's figure look very long and beautiful. Plus the tips that Li Fu had given him about his posture, it really made him look like the perfect image of a young master from an aristocratic family. Bai Lang raised his juice glass and clinked it against Qiu Jin's. Thank you? The suit cost over 100,000 yuan. If it's not handsome then Li Fu would really panic. Qiu Qian came closer. He pressed his hand that wasn't holding a wine glass against the small of Bai Lang's back. Honestly, what I want to do the most is to take it off. Bai Lang replied calmly, if you can defeat Xiao Hai then go ahead. Every time these 2 people came home late, then Qiu Xiao Hai would become unusually clingy. A few times before Bai Lang had accompanied him to sleep, and after those times Qiu Xiao Hai had become attached to this service. Thus since this evening fulfilled the requirement of going home late, then Qiu Xiao Hai would undoubtedly run into the main bedroom and want to sleep with them. Qiu Qian also knew. He felt regretful. The solution to stiffness is more exercise. Bai Lang really felt his back was sore. Let's go then. Who's the last person? Qiu Qian smiled and pointed at the other side for the venue. The most noisy place. That meant the corner where Su Quan was, as well as the old man in the wheelchair. It's been a long time. Elder Hong looks very well. That is very comforting. Qiu Qian waited until the people crowded around Hong Yu were momentarily quiet before making his greetings. The people made a way for Qiu Qian so that Hong Yu in the wheelchair could see him more easily. It was the first time that Bai Lang was given the opportunity to meet this legendary figure that before he had only heard about on the news. The just over 60 Hong Yu sat in his wheelchair. His hair was gray-white and his figure was very slight and thin. Even though he looked a bit tired, however, his eyes were extremely bright. Everyone knew that the reason that Hong Yu was in the wheelchair was because of a car accident a few years ago that was suspected to be intentional. His legs were damaged in the incident. Prior to that, although he was older, he had been considered quite a glamorous figure. As for Hong Yu's identity, other than the Hong family being an established political clan in the capital, what was more remarkable was his personal achievements. His job could be described in a complex way, but actually it was also very simple. Basically, it was to help people talk and come to an agreement. However, the things he helped people agree on was the differences between the various political factions. This kind of mediator who trod the line between multiple parties and varying interests originally should have been a wallflower type person whom all the parties disdained. However, the Hong family originally had quite a lot of power in the capital, and also Hong Yu had some special methods and was able to complete several important mediations beautifully. Thus, after that, more and more people came to find Hong Yu to help them arrange things. And his networks grew more broad, and he quickly became a powerful and persuasive force in his own right. Thus, even at the Wrong family's own birthday party, it was the host Strong Eye who paid his respects to Hong Yu and not the other way around. When he heard Qiu Jin's greetings, Hong Yu smiled. "Oh, it's Boss Qiu. I saw you from far away before and was thinking that it would be good to find an opportunity to talk to you today. However, it's inconvenient for me to move, so Boss Qiu will have to forgive me for waiting for you to come to me." Qiu Qian came forward and respectfully bowed his waist to shake hands with Hong Yu. He smiled and said, "I don't dare to trouble Elder Hong. Everyone here is a senior and has many important things to discuss. So this junior didn't want to trouble you too early, and that's why I'm late. Truly, it is a bit late." Hong Yu smiled, his eyes curving. He followed on by saying, "Couldn't you tell that Xiao Su has been hoping that you would come over the chat from very early on? This whole night he's had to accompany an old man like me. He must be very bored." Su Quan, who had been standing by Hong Yu with his hand on the back of the wheelchair the whole time, immediately bent down. His gentle face was completely different from the one he showed outside. "Teacher, you've misunderstood. Su Quan doesn't feel that way." Hong Yu's smile didn't change. He inclined his head and said, "You think I don't know you? Tonight you've been more quiet than usual. It really makes my heart ache. Right now Boss Qiu can also be considered your proper boss as well. You guys must have many things to talk about. It's only natural. You don't need to mind me." His words seemed very peaceful, however within them there were many different elements and meanings. Qiu Qian thus said, "The fact that Mr. Su was able to come to Total Entertainment was also due to Elder Hong's help. We will definitely support Mr. Su well in his work and won't let Elder Hong down." "That is good." Hong Yu smiled even more. However, then he suddenly said, "But does that mean that Boss Qiu will not help him with anything outside of work?" Qiu Qian laughed in a natural manner. "I'm sure Elder Hong already knows that Mr. Su and I are from the same hometown. Based on that, of course I will take good care of him." Hong Yu smiled and nodded. Although he looked satisfied, however, there was a flash in his eyes. Following that, he looked at the Bailang who was standing behind Qiu Qian. He asked, "The person next to Boss Qiu looks very familiar. Won't Boss Qiu introduce me?" Qiu Qian backed up slightly and used his left hand to support Bailang's waist. "This is Bailang. He's also one of the artists from Total Entertainment. Since today is a rare opportunity, I brought him here to experience things." Bailang met Hong Yu's gaze and felt that it wasn't kind. Thus he only nodded his head. "This junior is called Bailang. I'm honored to meet Mr. Hong." Hong Yu smiled as he received the greeting. He retracted his gaze and said, "Mr. Qiu is really a very successful businessman. Every seed you nurture is very excellent. However, if you put your main focus into entertainment, then it's too much of a pity. Based on your acumen, you can do much more. How old are you this year?" The last sentence was suddenly aimed at Bailang again. Bailang was surprised for a second, then answered, 24. 24. Hong Yu smiled again. "It really is very young. You need to grasp your opportunities well. After all, in your industry, the most valuable resource you have is your youth. Without discussing appearances, just based on age, even a film emperor can't compare to a junior like you. Isn't that right?" The named Su Quan bent over again. He lowered his eyes. "Teacher is right." Bailang felt this conversation was getting stranger and stranger. He was 80-90% sure that Hong Yu and Su Quan had a relationship. However, based on this conversation, it also didn't seem quite right. However, Qiu Qian also didn't have any patience for this kind of full of hidden meaning talk. He changed the topic and asked Hong Yu what he had been discussing with the others before. After 10 minutes of inconsequential chatter, he dragged Bailang to leave. During this time, other than the 2 sentences he spoke earlier, Su Quan didn't say a thing. However, his gaze kept returning to Qiu Qian throughout the conversation. And since he was standing behind Hong Yu's chair, then it was impossible for Hong Yu to see these glances. This situation made Bailang feel very uncomfortable. However, Qiu Jin's reaction was also somewhat special. Towards Su Quan's glances, Qiu Qian behaved as though he completely didn't notice. He only talked to Hong Yu and the others. Under normal circumstances, if during conversation, someone keeps looking at you, then politeness would dictate that you should also look back once or twice to show acknowledgement. Qiu Qian wasn't someone that hadn't been in society. From his behavior tonight, Bai Lang could tell he was very experienced in social situations. Thus his response to Su Quan should be purposeful ignoring. If the reason was because of not wanting Bai Lang to misunderstand, then it seemed a bit childish and not like Qiu Qian. So when they got in the car, Bai Lang's thoughts were still wavering. All the way until Qiu Qian grabbed him and pulled him into his arms. Because he had to drink tonight, the Qiu Qian who usually liked to drive himself, had asked Xiaoli to drop them off and pick them up. The car was also one which was appropriate to the situation. It wasn't the Land Rover that Qiu Qian normally liked to drive, but instead a long black limousine. This meant that between the driver and the back seat there was a wall separating them. What's with the face? Qiu Qian pulled Bai Lang over and began to massage his shoulders. Having a question but not asking it, is it fun to keep it stuffed inside your heart? Bai Lang looked at Qiu Jin's disbelieving face and then slightly relaxed his body and leaned against him. Then he said, "What's the relationship between Su Quan and Hong Yu?" "That's the question you want to ask." Qiu Qian laughed lowly. "I thought everyone present could tell." Bai Lang went silent. However, even though he suspected it, he still felt a bit shocked. Based on Su Quan's appearance and skill, it turns out he also still needed a patron behind the scenes to support him. He had never heard talk like this about Su Quan in his past life. However, based on Hong Yu's power and influence, this wasn't unexpected. However, just now Hong Yu's attitude, it didn't seem that way. Qiu Qian held the back of Bai Lang's head and lowered his head to kiss him. He asked, "Back then you came to me and wanted a contractual relationship. Did you think about what would happen in 10 years? "I did," Bai Lang nodded. Qiu Qian raised his eyebrow. "Oh. Pray, tell me. You find someone new and I would gracefully withdraw." Qiu Qian narrowed his eyes. "You really have a lot of confidence in me." Even though I haven't studied statistics before, I still understand the concept. Qiu Qian punished him by biting Bai Lang's lips. This time he claimed every inch tyrannically and didn't release him for a long time. "Then what would happen if I was captivated by you, to the point where I didn't want to let go? Then what would you do? Isn't it like that now?" Bai Lang could barely breathe but still managed these words. Qiu Qian went still, then laughed joyfully. He dragged the person onto his leg and lovingly caressed him. "I know, since Xiaohai is at home, we can solve the problem of your stiffness right now." "On." Bai Lang froze and then turned his head to ensure that the window to the driver's side was shut. "I'll remember to block your mouth. Xiaoli won't be able to hear anything." Qiu Qian enthusiastically bit Bai Lang's neck and said in his throaty voice. However, the motion of the car couldn't be disguised and Xiaoli was someone that Bai Lang had to see often. Thus he firmly shook his head. Then he sighed and amended, "Actually, before sleeping with Xiaohai, we still have to take a shower." Qiu Jin's eyes lit up. "We really haven't done it in the bathroom before." "So can you please take out your hand from my pants?" Bai Lang asked helplessly. Qiu Jin's mouth quirked and he obediently retracted his hand. He continued to hold Bai Lang and let him rest in his arms. Here he turned to the previous topic. Hong Yu and Su Quan have between them a contract of 12 years. The time is already up and so theoretically Su Quan should have his freedom back. However, it seems Hong Yu isn't willing. Bai Lang thought for a while. So is Su Quan looking for another pathway to escape? Maybe. Is that pathway you? If his freedom is more important to him than his reputation, then I can do it. However, it seemed that Su Quan hadn't chosen his freedom because his reputation was still very much intact. And his progress within the country and overseas had also been very successful. And as for Qiu Qian, for some reason, every few years he would change to new small star to keep. This time Bai Lang was silent for a long time before asking, "What's your reason for helping him?" Qiu Qian once again supported Bai Lang's head and met his gaze. He smiled lowly and said, "Finally you deigned to ask." Bai Lang didn't reply, however he didn't hide from Qiu Jin's gaze. Qiu Qian smiled. "A long time ago, just when I thought that Su Quan and I would become a pair, Su Quan left with Hong Yu." Bai Lang saw a slight expression of self-mockery appear on Qiu Jin's face. He didn't interrupt and waited for him to continue. "At that time I was just a rascal that sailed a boat. I did earn some small money but I was almost never on shore. Su Quan's biggest desire was to be successful and he didn't have time to play the game of you wait for me, I wait for you. That's why he chose Hong Yu. I guess you can say that both of us put bread before love. We're quite similar in that way, so that's why in the end we became old friends." Bai Lang stared at the smile on Qiu Jin's face. However, he didn't feel relaxed. because now some hints and clues from his past life were now linked together, just as Yachi said. After all, someone might speak and think aware about themselves ideologically, however when compared to reality, there were still differences. For example, Bai Lang himself. Prior to talking to Yachi, he had also thought that he wouldn't be affected by Kyujin's previous relationships. But now that he was really faced with it, there really was a knot at the bottom of his heart. Although he could hide it from other people, he couldn't hide it from himself. In the same way, Kyuchien might appear relaxed right now, but his behavior of continually changing from small star to small star could also be seen as a method of revenge. This meant that while logically Kyuchien might understand Su Quan's rejection, however his feelings might be different. BL thinks that the reason in his past life that QQ was never able to truly settle down was because he never got over SQ. However, even if that was the case, then who said everything in this life would still be the same? In his past life, he had never met Rongsaki, he had never held Kyuzayo high, and he had also, never like this, rested inside Kyujin's arms. In this life, regardless how Kyuchien felt, Bai Lang's heart had moved. He didn't dare to expect forever, however he only wanted honesty and not lies as in his previous life with Kang Jian. Thus Bai Lang lowered his eyes and quietly asked, "So you're just friends?" Kyujin's laughter rocked his chest. He repeated, "Just friends." Bai Lang didn't follow him to laugh. He only nodded. "I don't accept sharing? What a coincidence, I'm the same." Kyujin's eyes went dark. "Remember what I said before. If you find someone new then." He didn't get to finish before Kyuchien blocked his mouth again. This time Bai Lang passionately responded. It was as though he wanted to embed himself into this position in this person's arms. So Kyuchien was made so excited that he couldn't stop. These two people had no choice but to use their hands to do it halfway, otherwise they really wouldn't be able to get out of the car. However, it was lucky that they had relieved themselves, because as soon as they got home they saw Kyuzayo high on the king-sized bed in the main bedroom, curled up fast asleep with his big rabbit pillow. Such a small figure sleeping on such a large bed, the image was very lonely. Any desire that they had disappeared when met with this image. The two people hurried to wash up and then tiptoed onto the bed. They slept on either side of Kyuzayo high. Kyuzayo high seemed to feel something in his sleep. He scrunched up his face, clutched his rabbit pillow and rolled over to Bai Lang's side. Bai Lang carefully straightened Kyuzayo high's arms and legs, then pressed a kiss against his head. When he raised his head, it was his turn to be kissed by Kyuchien, who huddled closer. He added a sentence which he hadn't said in the car. "You don't need to worry. You've already captivated us long ago."